Right, hey guys, I want to talk about another film that I recently rewatched. There's a bunch of things that I'm looking forward to watch. I just haven't really decided if I want to renew my Amazon subscription to watch The Rings of Power, considering all the rumors and backlash that I've been hearing about. So yeah, I mean, after the disaster that was She-Hulk episode one, I have not really followed up since. I want to just let the whole storm pass so that I can probably watch it unbiased. Because right now, I think, considering my comments on the first episode that I watched, and considering all the other reviews and comments that I'm, checking out online, it just seems like She-Hulk is just it's just like a dumpster fire that just keeps on having oil added to it. And so on top of not being a good time already, considering a lot of similar TV series are going with this kind of political agenda of race swapping, gender swapping, and all of these sorts of things. Aside from, like on top of all of that, having like trying to watch them all at once, I think is a bad idea. So I'm gonna just take my time and let the storm pass, and then probably check out Rings of Power once all of it is settled. Because I need to get my Amazon subscription. I'm not really sure what else to get it for right now. There's not much options. Like The Boys was probably the only thing that I would have subscribed for, but since it's not a thing anymore, and we gotta wait for Rings of Power's weekly release, I think I'm just gonna wait for the entire thing. I see no reason why I should be subscribing monthly to something that I'm barely gonna be using. So anyway, now that that's aside, let's talk about the usual suspects. So I came back to revisit this film after nearly, I think I watched this about 20 years ago. This film is a lot older, of course. It's made in '95, at which time I was still a kid. So even if I had watched it, then I wouldn't really understand it. But I think about 20 years ago, I did watch this film, and I liked it as is because it's not that complex of a film. Everything sort of falls in place at the very end, and sort of like the big reveal is done within a 5 to 10 minute span. Actually, it's within 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, you sort of get the full closure as to what's really happening um, towards the end of the story. But other than that, it's a bit dragged out in between. So watching it again today, it really feels slow and awkward and really stuttery and with long gaps. Very old-fashioned storytelling that doesn't really live in today's fast-paced world. Like this is an hour 46, right? If this was done today, it'll be an hour 20, hour 15 maybe, just because of how fast-paced today's films are. Regardless, as for just the acting, the dialogue, and the storytelling, I think this film still deserves a lot of credit, considering the time it was made, the cast that it had. Kevin Spacey, Gabriel Byrne, Stephen Baldwin, and yeah, even Benicio del Toro. I'm not sure who. I don't think I watched many of Chaz Palminteri's films. I'm not really too sure about this guy. I know about Pete uh, Postlethwaite. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his last name, but I've seen this guy in a few films, and I think he's a very famous Native American actor, or at least a mix or something like that, is what he looks like. Everyone knows Giancarlo Esposito. I think that's nothing. Um, he's quite famous, right? But I'm not really sure what this guy has starred in. Why am I saying Courtney Cox and Jason Momoa? I'm really confused. But regardless, I don't really know much about him. But a lot of the cast are really good actors. But on top of that, they had a great story to deliver. And I think that was pretty much done. The dialogues in this film are really used at the right moments, but at the same time, they're scarce. At times where you wish that there were just a little more exposition. Although you can argue with the point that exposition makes things a lot more boring. I felt that in this film they sort of jump from moments of the current day to the past very quickly, as Kevin Spacey is telling his part of the story while he's captured by these police force. And so the jumps sort of feel very disconnected from the core story itself, because you don't see the full picture until the very end. It just seems like you always are not fully into the story. You can't fully grasp it, or try to be a part of it, because you don't really know what's going on until the very end. And that's my main issue with this. And I'm not sure if I'm describing it the best way I can to you guys, but that's exactly how I feel watching this film. Another example of something where you can be a little more connected. Let me think. Give me a second. It looked like some reference up. All right, the other two really good plot twist films I can think of immediately is The Prestige by Christopher Nolan and Shutter Island by Martin Scorsese, two of my, I would say, favorite Hollywood directors. And I think the only one follows these two is Zack Snyder, for his visual style. Like if you put these three minds together, the script writing of Martin Scorsese with the screenplay of Christopher Nolan, and the visual effects direction of Zack Snyder, I think you get like the ultimate film that would score more than a 10. But regardless, these are two very good plot twist films. And in these films, you really feel that you're with the character, you're following their journey all the way to the very end when the twist really happens. In Shutter Island, that is the same. You're convinced that you are the character and you are walking in their shoes and you can feel bad for them in the situation they're in. The Prestige works the same way. You can feel bad for the main character, even though he has a villain, a counterpart. You sort of want to side by both, Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale because both of them are playing very important roles. In The Usual Suspects, however, this does not feel like it. You don't really feel like you want to tie yourself to any of these characters because you're put in a position where you don't trust any of them and you don't really feel any of them are that cool or interesting either. And there's also a very clear standout character, which is Gabriel Bryant's Keaton. He seems to be just a very core part of the story where all fingers try to point to him. And of course, there's the big twist in the end. And for those of you who have not watched it, I highly recommend you stop watching this review and go and check out the film because I'm going to be breaking down the plot a little bit. So you have 5 seconds. Please leave. I'm so sorry, but you guys have to come back when you watch the film because this is a film that relies on its twist. And once you know it, you don't really enjoy the ending. So thanks for watching. Okay, as for the rest of you guys, so if you're still here, it's spoiler time, yeah? All right. So The Usual Suspects, for those of you who want to know the story, or those of you who've already watched it, pretty much is the story of these five guys who are picked up as suspects when there is a sort of an explosion that takes place on a ship, and there's an arms dealing. That's what the police people believe was some kind of arms dealing or some kind of drug bust or drug dealing that was going on the ship. And so, a bunch of people are found dead. A lot of men are found dead. And so these five people are picked up from around town because they are usually the ones who are pointed to if there is at all anything suspicious going on. And so they are the usual suspects. They are the ones that the police want to pin a crime on when they can't really find anyone else just because these people are already so famously notorious for so many other situations. And sometimes the police department just can't seem to find the right case to pin on them. And so just finding the next best case would be an ideal scenario. And so these people get picked up, they're told to tell a specific line, something, something, uh, I'm going to shoot you or something like that, cocksucker or something. And so they all phrase it out together in their own respective voices, and then they are split apart. The police are interrogating them, and the story goes on. Eventually, we are introduced to this mysterious character who is not mentioned early on. Oh God, what's his name? Hang on, let me pull up that mysterious character's name. Right, it's Kaiser Soze, right? That's the name. So they all eventually point to this sort of a man behind the shadows who's running the story, who's controlling everything, who's manipulating everything, and he's known as Kaiser Soze. And so they believe that there is this mysterious figure, Kaiser Soze, who is actually controlling this team and making them, go about their criminal activities. And so this team of usual suspects, they actually get together and they're actually shown as people who rob banks, they rob people. Sometimes they rob people who are robbing others just because they know that there is some diamonds or some loot along the way. And how this entire plot is delivered to the police department who are doing the investigation, who I think, like our ears, are actually the police department's ears. So this detective you see over here, this is technically us because we only ever get the story from his point of view. And he is listening to the story that's being told by Kevin Spacey. And so he is taking Kevin Spacey's words as the ultimate scenario, right? He believes in Kevin Spacey. And so the entire perspective of the story is told from Kevin Spacey's, ideas that the detective's perspective captures, and we get it. So this is where I feel there's a huge disconnect because it's literally a story that you have to understand from this guy's brain, and you barely relate to this guy. And then it's told by Kevin Spacey, who would be the right person to relate to, but you can't really do that because you don't trust Kevin Spacey either. And so the story mounts on to where this usual suspects team have been going about a bunch of crimes, and it leads to the point where they end up on the ship that finally the final action takes place. And so it turns out that there was no real drugs or money or gold or guns or anything aboard. It was actually just a setup for the Kaiser Soze, who's been using them to gather what do you call this? Basically riches for him, right? Diamonds and whatever. To gather all of that, it's his chance to actually finish them off and keep the loot or keep whatever that he has earned by manipulating this team of the usual suspects. So finally, it points out, like all fingers point to the possibility that Kaiser Soze is actually among the team themselves. It's not a third person who hires this mysterious lawyer who comes and tells them to do things. So Kaiser Soze is sort of like the boogeyman in the story, right? They use him as a way to go about business. They say that he's not even a real thing. He's just a mythical figure that's just created so that people can use his name to do business and people are afraid of the name. And that sort of concept is brought up, and I really like that idea. That idea alone, I think, deserves points for the film. But on top of all of that, finally they believe that Keaton is Kaiser Soze, and this entire loop comes, like goes around when Kevin Spacey and the detective are discussing with each other, and the detective suggests that it has to be Keaton, and that Kevin Spacey is just too dumb. And throughout the film, there's this kind of, I guess, how can you put it? It's like a general theme or also a way to just believe that because Kevin Spacey is physically retarded, he's also mentally retarded. Like, I don't know if this is a common thing. Like, yes, a person can have physical retardation, but that's not really doesn't really mean that they're actually stupid, right? Because if they're mentally retarded and they're physically fine, it's not really a related thing. But I guess, yeah, in some way, the detective believes that because Kevin Spacey is this weak-looking, physically retarded guy, that he's also mentally not that intelligent, and so he underestimates him and tells him, "Because you're stupid, you've been fooled." And Keaton is the one running everything from the shadows. He wants you to believe that Kaiser Soze is actually a third figure that you guys have never met. And so when everything points to Keaton, Kevin Spacey is finally released. Verbal is released, and he's allowed to go away. And yeah, while this seems like a huge prejudice sort of a situation, yeah, he's left to go, and the detective believes that the investigation has been concluded, and they have to look for Keaton, who is supposedly still out there and probably not dead, and at least that's what they believe. Verbal, on the other hand, believes that Keaton was actually murdered, but the detective asks him, "Are you sure you saw Keaton getting murdered?" And so while Verbal doesn't answer, the detective believes that Keaton is still out there and they got to go after him. But at the very end, the twists reveal that Verbal is the actual Kaiser Soze, and he's been the one who's actually been manipulating everything from the shadows. And so he's the one who's set up for the entire usual suspects to go around, loot a bunch of stuff, and eventually kill all of them to, tie up the loose ends so that he can escape and continue his mission elsewhere. Looking for another crew, another way to make money, and basically go about his day. And so the way he builds up this incredible story is basically from this board of clues that is in the detective's very room behind him, full of different words and places and names and stuff like that. And so he uses all of that to link up a story and manifest an entirely new story just from the board behind the detective's desk. And this is what I feel, threw me off a little bit. If you are really a detective and you really spend your time putting up pin-up notes to try to remember every single name and location, when you hear those names and locations mentioned at least twice from someone in a conversation, you sort of know that it's in the board that's right behind you, right? This is where the story really, really took me a step back, and this is why I want to change my review here and drop another point, perhaps. That's the only real thing that I felt that I don't like it when a detective story shows you that the detective is just a complete moron, right? Like the detective doesn't believe that Kevin Spacey is, a physically retarded guy who, he's also mentally retarded. He thinks, that's the case. Okay, fine. You slip up once, detective, because that's your sort of stereotype, right, for these kinds of people. Fine. But now you also can't even remember the board that you yourself built up with all your clues and investigations. That doesn't seem very realistic at all, right? So that's kind of my main point of why I feel that. it has its weakness, and also the whole bouncing off perspectives to get the right story. You're seeing the story through the eyes of the detective who's trying to get the story from the eyes of Kevin Spacey, who's trying to tell you the story of the usual suspects, who each of them obviously have their own story, but you're not really going to know about that. This is where the story really disconnects from me, and I feel that that's the weakness this story really has. But aside from that, it has a very unique concept about using this third person, this ghost sort of character who's Kaiser Soze, who's running things from the shadows, but need not necessarily be an actual person. He just needs to be a concept because in the end, Kaiser Soze did in fact fool the usual suspects into performing the crimes that he wanted before tying off their loose ends and escaping from the police department themselves. And so it's also possible that these police department just did not have the right detective on the job. That's highly likely. But the one where the detective doesn't remember his own pin-up notes, that yeah, that's a no, big no for me. So I'm just gonna drop the rating for The Usual Suspects down to a 7 here because I think it's still an excellent film for the time it was made, with excellent script writing, good dialogues, good cast. But a detective investigation story really has to be intelligent because that's the whole point of being a detective. If you're not intelligent enough to figure things out, you really don't deserve to be where you are. And on top of all of that, if you are a detective who's just being told the story of some random billboard or pin-up notes, that totally makes sense. But from the pin-up that was right behind you when you were running the entire investigation, or rather several other investigations, it really doesn't make sense. Because quite frankly, I've met real life detectives, like some friends of my, dads or whatever. And trust me, they remember names. They remember names. They remember faces, like they were their own family, their own friends. And they never even met these people. They just read about them, but they remember everything. And that's really, really the key to being a great detective. Good memory, good problem solving skills. And so, yeah, that really is a sort of a unfortunate, thing that I don't really agree with. But yeah, aside from that, I highly recommend you guys to also check out The Prestige and Shutter Island if you have not, because these are the two of some of the greatest movies of all time. And Shutter Island's, of course, just a straight up 10 for me. The Prestige, I would really like to rate this a little higher, though I felt that certain parts were a little bit underwhelming. But I'm a huge fan of this film. I really like The Prestige even more than Shutter Island personally. But as a film, Shutter Island is just better. It's just done better. The Prestige, on the other hand, just does not seem to tie itself off that well. But yeah, so another film for you guys to rewatch if you have watched it before in the past and it's been a long time. But if you guys have not checked it out, I highly recommend you guys check out The Usual Suspects. It's a great movie, a film with made by Bryan Singer, a film that I think of course has it has not aged as gracefully as many other films, perhaps because the time it was made, it was a little bit slow, and I think the writing was a little bit off. But regardless, it was still pretty impressive, and it was pretty fun to watch a detective film after so long. So yeah, that's it from me for this one. Hope you guys had a great week and a great weekend. I will be adding more films to my watch list, and I will let you guys know if I manage to check out The Rings of Power. But that's it from me for this one. Take care, guys.